In the summer of 1993, 17-year-old Sarah Jennings was living the kind of life that seemed simple on the surface, but was filled with the unspoken weight of being young and trusted with responsibility. She had just finished her junior year of high school and had picked up a summer job that countless teenagers before her had done, lifeguarding at the town's community pool. Bright red shirt, whistle around her neck, reflective sunglasses that made her look older than she was. It was a role that came with both authority and routine. Day after day, she sat perched in the sun, keeping watch over children who were into the water, and parents who lingered at the shallow end. Her friends remembered her as the kind of girl who was dependable, quiet, but warm. She didn't go to many parties, didn't push boundaries, but she had a strong sense of responsibility. When she was scheduled for the evening shift, everyone knew she would be there, ready to lock up after the last swimmers left. That sense of duty made what happened next even harder to believe. On the night of July 17, 1993, Sarah's co-workers said she stayed late as usual. She blew her whistle once to signal closing time, then began the routine cleanup, chairs stacked, umbrellas folded, gates locked. One of the last people to see her was a mother who had stayed until the end with her children. She recalled Sarah smiling, brushing damp hair off her face, the whistle cord bouncing as she locked the heavy chain at the entrance gate. After that moment, Sarah simply vanished. When her parents woke up the next morning and realized her bed had not been slept in, panic set in quickly. Calls to her friends went nowhere. By noon, the police had been notified. Officers drove to the pool expecting to find her bike still there or her uniform shirt hanging in the locker room, but instead, everything appeared perfectly in order. The gates were locked. The pool was calm, glowing with its chemical blue shimmer. Her belongings weren't inside. It looked as though she had walked away from the place she was meant to guard and disappeared into the night. The investigation in those early days was frantic. Search teams combed the neighborhoods, knocking on doors. Officers asked if anyone had seen the teenage girl in her bright red shirt with the whistle she always wore on its black cord. Flyers with her school photo were stapled to telephone poles, the kind that looked eerily out of place against the backdrop of summer barbecues and Little League games. But there were no leads, no tire marks in the gravel lot, no sign of a struggle. Sarah had vanished so cleanly that even seasoned detectives admitted privately that the scene unsettled them. Disappearances often left traces, a dropped purse, a broken lock, an unfinished task, but here, the gates were shut tight, the chairs stacked neatly. It was as if she had closed the pool exactly as she was supposed to and then dissolved into thin air. Her family clung to the idea that maybe she had slipped away voluntarily, perhaps gone to meet a friend. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope faded. Sarah wasn't the kind of girl to run away without a word. She had left behind her wallet, her school books, even her plans to visit her grandmother that weekend. Her absence wasn't a choice. It was something darker. By August, the pool had reopened under new staff. Kids splashed in the water while parents tried not to stare at the empty lifeguard chair, the whistle of its new occupant sounding sharper, more haunting than before. For those who knew Sarah, every swim stroke seemed to echo her absence. And for investigators, one detail stood out: her uniform shirt and whistle were missing. They weren't at home. They weren't in her locker. That absence would go unexplained for nearly 3 decades until a discovery in 2022 would force everyone to look back at that summer with fresh horror. But in 1993, all they had was silence, a locked gate, and the unsettling feeling that something terrible had happened right after Sarah closed up for the night. When news broke in 2022 that Sarah Jennings's lifeguard uniform and whistle had been found, the town reacted with a mix of shock and disbelief. For nearly 3 decades, her disappearance had become a kind of closed wound, something spoken of in hushed tones, but rarely revisited. Now, with the pool finally scheduled for demolition, her belongings had resurfaced in the most unsettling place of all, the pool itself. The construction crew that discovered them described the moment in unsettling detail. As they pried open the corroded grates of the filter system, a wave of foul water and tangled debris spilled out. Among the muck was a flash of faded red fabric. At first, they assumed it was just trash, some old shirt left behind years earlier. But when the letters across the chest became visible, coated in algae yet still unmistakable, silence fell over the crew. The word "Lifeguard" stared back at them. Beside it lay the whistle, white plastic cracked and discolored, its cord twisted into a knot of slime and rust. The men paused, unsure whether to continue. "It didn't feel like finding evidence," one of them later said quietly. "It felt like disturbing something that had been left to rest." The items were rushed to law enforcement. Forensic analysts examined the fabric and plastic, searching for DNA or trace evidence. But nearly 30 years in water had stripped them of their secrets. The shirt was brittle, its fibers eaten by chlorine and time. The whistle yielded nothing except the faint outline of where teeth had once pressed against its surface. Still, the psychological impact was undeniable. Here were the objects Sarah had been wearing the night she vanished, lost to sight, but hidden in plain reach all along. Theories erupted almost instantly. Some believed she had fallen into the pool after hours, her body slipping into the filter system. But that explanation made little sense. Her body had never been found, and the gates had been locked from the outside. Others suggested something far darker, perhaps someone had forced her uniform and whistle into the filter deliberately as a way of erasing the trail. The idea of an abductor standing over the drained pool, shoving her belongings into the grate, sent chills through the community. Why would someone go to such lengths unless they wanted her disappearance to remain a question mark forever? The families of Sarah's former co-workers were torn between relief and fresh grief. One of her old friends, now in her 40s, told a local reporter, "Seeing that shirt again, it was like she was right back with us, whistling kids out of the deep end, telling us not to run." But at the same time, it was like finding a gravestone. The rediscovery reignited the investigation. Detectives who had never even worked the original case were suddenly combing through old files, trying to connect dots that had gone cold before they were even hired. They reviewed witness statements from 1993, re-examined rumors about the strange car idling in the parking lot that night, and even tracked down Sarah's surviving relatives to ask if they recognized anything unusual about the shirt or whistle. But no new answers surfaced. The objects themselves seemed to mock investigators, proof that Sarah had been there, proof that she hadn't walked away on her own, but nothing that explained where she had gone after that night. The mystery had survived almost 30 years untouched, and the discovery only deepened the darkness surrounding it. What unsettled people most wasn't just what was found. It was the timing. Why had the shirt and whistle stayed hidden for so long? Could it really be possible that no one had noticed them during previous cleanings, that they had remained wedged in the filter all this time? Or had someone placed them there later, when attention had finally faded? The pool's demolition was delayed as law enforcement secured the site, hoping for further clues. Workers searched through the cracks of the drained basin, sifting through muck, pulling out broken tiles and rusted bolts. Nothing else appeared, no jewelry, no shoes, no remains. Just the shirt and the whistle left as if to say, she was here and now she is gone. For Sarah's family, the discovery was a cruel paradox. After 30 years of silence, they finally had something tangible. But instead of answers, they were given more questions, an eerie echo of her presence without her return. Her mother said it best in a local interview, "It's like hearing her voice from the past. She was calling for help, and we never heard her." And with that, what had once been a faded story from 1993 was thrust violently into the present. The town that thought it had moved on was now dragged back into a mystery that seemed both unsolvable and unwilling to stay buried. But the strangest part was still to come. When investigators examined the whistle one last time under ultraviolet light, they noticed something that hadn't been visible to the naked eye, a faint smear of ink, as though someone had tried to write on it years ago. The letters were nearly gone, washed away by time and water, but one mark remained clear enough to recognize. It was the start of a name. The ultraviolet test on the whistle was supposed to be routine, just another box to check before filing the item away. But what the lab discovered sent ripples through the department. Under the bluish glow, faint smudges appeared along the whistle's flat surface, marks invisible to the naked eye. To most, it looked like little more than random staining, the byproduct of decades underwater. But one technician noticed the way the marks curved, how they resembled lettering. After hours of careful imaging, they concluded it wasn't random at all. Someone had written on the whistle. The message wasn't complete, most of it erased by years of water and chlorine, but one portion stood out, 3 shaky letters, faint but undeniable. They formed the beginning of a name, /. Investigators were shaken. Sarah Jennings's name had been there all along, scratched faintly into the surface of the very whistle she wore that night. Some believed she may have marked it herself, carving her name, as teenagers often did, into belongings. But the problem was that the marks didn't look carved. They looked written. Analysts suggested it was ink, perhaps from a ballpoint pen, faded into ghostly lines by decades underwater. If Sarah had written it herself, it raised no questions. But if someone else had, it became chilling evidence. Why would another person write her name onto her whistle unless they had been close to her, or had taken her? The discovery was leaked almost immediately. Local reporters ran with it, painting the whistle as a silent witness carrying her name across 3 decades to demand attention. Her family, though, saw it differently. To them, it felt like Sarah's final attempt to leave a mark, a message meant to say, "I was here." Theories reignited. On one hand were those who clung to the idea that Sarah's death had been a tragic accident, that she had somehow fallen into the pool after hours and her belongings had been pulled into the filter. But this theory never explained why her body had never been found or why the gates had been locked behind her. On the other end were those who believed the whistle's lettering proved foul play, that someone had deliberately taken her, stripped her of her uniform, and shoved it into the filter as a way of mocking investigators. The timing of the discovery in 2022 made the speculation even darker. If her belongings had truly been hidden in the pool all along, how had no one seen them during maintenance over the years? Pools were drained, filters checked. Workers swore they had cleaned the system before, which meant one possibility remained: the items hadn't been there the whole time. They had been placed there later, long after the case had gone cold. That thought unsettled everyone. It meant someone had kept Sarah's belongings for decades and only returned them when they believed nobody was watching. Why in 2022? Was it coincidence that the pool was being demolished? Or had the person responsible wanted the items to be found now, to remind the town of what they'd lost? Sarah's family found themselves reliving old grief with new intensity. Her mother couldn't bear to look at the whistle again, insisting it was like hearing her call from underwater. Her father, who had long since stopped speaking publicly, agreed to one interview. His words were blunt and devastating: she didn't walk away. Someone made her disappear, and now they're playing games with us. Investigators launched a full re-examination of the case. They tracked down the pool's old employees, revisited the story of the idling car seen near the gates in 1993, and combed through records for anyone connected to Sarah in her final weeks. But like before, the leads led nowhere. Witnesses were dead, memories faded, files incomplete. The only new evidence sat silent in an evidence bag, a faded red shirt and a cracked whistle with the faint shadow of her name. Still, the whistle's message gnawed at those who saw it. One detective admitted privately that he believed the smear of letters wasn't just a name. He thought it was the start of a longer sentence, something Sarah had tried to scroll in her final moments, interrupted before she could finish. "It looks rushed," he said. Like she didn't have time. Like she was trying to leave us a clue and she couldn't. But without proof, all they had was speculation. And speculation in a case this cold was dangerous. It gave false hope. It led to dead ends. Yet, there was one more twist still waiting. Because as investigators prepared to close out their new review, a former city worker stepped forward with a memory he had never shared before, one tied directly to the pool and to a night in 1993 when something didn't feel right. The man who came forward in 2022 was not a detective or a relative. He was a retired city worker, a maintenance technician who had once been responsible for the pool where Sarah Jennings disappeared. He admitted that he had never spoken publicly before because, at the time, he didn't think what he saw mattered. But now, nearly 30 years later, he couldn't ignore the weight of it. According to his statement, on the night of Sarah's disappearance in 1993, he had driven past the community center just after midnight. He had been on his way home from a repair job and noticed something strange. The pool lights were still on. The gates were closed, but inside the fence, he thought he saw movement, shadows crossing the deck. At first, he assumed Sarah was finishing her shift, but what struck him was the car parked near the service entrance, an old sedan unfamiliar to him, engine running, lights off. He slowed as he drove by. He recalled glancing into the lot just long enough to see someone tall, wearing dark clothes, leaning near the lifeguard chair. Another figure, smaller, stood closer to the locker room doors. It was only a glimpse, and he couldn't be sure if the smaller figure was Sarah. He didn't stop. He didn't call anyone. By morning, news of her disappearance had spread, and the memory dug into him like a splinter. For years, he told himself it was just a trick of the light, a scene misremembered. But now, with her shirt and whistle recovered from the pool's filter, he couldn't help but believe he had witnessed the beginning of whatever took her. Detectives treated his account carefully. Too much time had passed. Details blur after decades. Memories warp with guilt. But his story matched what others had whispered, a car seen near the pool, headlights dark, engine running, a presence that didn't belong. If his memory was real, then Sarah's disappearance had not been the quiet, inexplicable vanishing it seemed. It had been witnessed. It had left a trace, however faint. And that realization reopened old wounds in a way no piece of evidence could. Sarah's mother listened to the testimony with shaking hands. She asked the question out loud that everyone else was thinking: if he had stopped, if he had called, would my daughter still be here? No one could answer. The whistle and shirt remained the only physical artifacts of her final moments. They sat in evidence bags, drained of the bright color they once had, reduced to shadows of the girl who wore them. To the public, they became symbols of how fragile truth can be, items that should have given closure only deepened the mystery. Why were they stuffed in the filter? Why was her name scrolled faintly across the whistle? Who had been in that pool that night when she locked the gates for the last time? Theories multiplied but offered no resolution. Some believed Sarah had been ambushed by someone who knew her routine. Others believed she had been forced to write her name on the whistle in a desperate attempt to leave behind a clue. A few darker voices even suggested the items had been kept as trophies, hidden for decades, then returned to the pool as a final taunt before demolition. Whatever the truth, one fact remained: Sarah Jennings was never found. No body, no confession, no resolution. Only a whistle cracked by time and a shirt stained with water and rust, echoing through the years like a cruel reminder. In the end, her story remained unfinished. Families still drove past the vacant lot where the pool once stood, slowing down as if they might catch a glimpse of her red shirt in the sun. Former co-workers admitted they still heard phantom whistles in the breeze, short, sharp blasts that seemed to call swimmers out of the deep end. And those who had grown up in the town learned that absence can haunt more than presence ever could. Almost 30 years later, Sarah Jennings was no longer just the lifeguard who vanished after her shift. She had become a story parents whispered to their children, a cautionary tale wrapped in chlorine and silence. And the pool that once shimmered with laughter had become a graveyard of secrets, drained but never empty. The whistle's faint letters remained the closest thing to her voice, a plea, a message, or simply a mark of ownership. It was impossible to know. What mattered was that it had endured through water, rust, and time. It had survived when nothing else had. And so the story of the vanished lifeguard lingers, unresolved, echoing across decades. A summer job that ended with silence. A whistle that blew one last time.